Hello, everybody. Welcome to everybody to come tonight, the pta-LST webinar series, Sustainable Business Transformation. So when we talk about the business, often we mean competition, which center on the core spirit to win. When we talk about sustainability, the first things we usually do often is to look at how business is required to comply with the regulations and how to enhance business legitimacy and social responsibilities. What are the blind spots that we usually ignore when we talk about either business or sustainability? And how could we transform business towards sustainability? And why should we do that? How do we know in 5 to 10 years' time, the business we invest in is still relevant in this ever-changing environment? And more presently, how do we balance between today's operational challenges and tomorrow's sustainable growth strategy? So today, we've got 3 distinguished panelists here to discuss today's needs, tomorrow's growth. Can business have both through sustainable transformation? Today's meeting is recorded and will be live broadcasted in Bilibili. So we highly encourage every participant to take the opportunity to raise great questions and communicate with our panelists after their 3 presentations are finished. So let me briefly introduce PTA. pta-plant Technology Alliance is innovative social enterprise aiming at environmental sustainability. Since the establishment, PTA has actively worked together with individuals or institutions in Hong Kong, Taipei, Chengdu, Guangzhou, Jinan, Tianjin, Shanghai, Beijing, Boston, New York, and Washington, D.C. PTA has 3 sectors of operations, including education, incubator, and media. We are committed to bring different sectors of life together for sustainable transformation of society. Now, I'd like to introduce our 3 distinguished panelists here. First of all, we're so honored today to have Professor Stuart Hart with us. Stuart is a world-leading authority on sustainable value and the implications of environment and poverty for business strategy. According to Bloomberg Business Week, he is one of the founding fathers of the base of a pyramid economic theory. He is the author of the best-selling book, Capitalism at Crossroads, Next Generation Business Strategies for a Post-Crisis World. Stuart is also the founder and the president of Enterprise for a Sustainable World and founder of the Base of a Pyramid Global Network. Currently, Stuart is a Stephen Grossman Distinguished Fellow in Sustainable Innovation at University of Vermont Grossman School of Business. He is also the C.S. Johnson Professor Emeritus in Sustainable Global Enterprise at Cornell University. As a pioneer of business education on global sustainable transformation, Stuart founded educational and research centers on global sustainable business at Cornell University, the University of North Carolina, and the University of Michigan. Stuart has served as consultant, advisor, and management educator for dozens of corporations and organizations, including DuPont, C.S. Johnson, Unilever, Caterpillar, Walmart, the World Economic Forum, and the Clinton Global Initiative. He is an internationally recognized speaker and has delivered hundreds of keynote addresses on the topic of sustainable business around the world. Today, he brings the presentation topic, systematic risks from the failure of today's market and sustainable value framework for tomorrow. Our second wonderful panelist is Laura Arcelia. Laura is the Chief Sustainable Officer at WholeWorks. She's also the Senior Director at the Council of the Great Lakes region. Laura used to work for a prestigious consulting firm, Pixera Global in Washington, D.C. Before that, she headed the corporate communication at Dow Cornell. Let me shortly introduce WholeWorks. WholeWorks developed the leading sustainability transformation professional certificate program, which is abbreviated as LST program. WholeWorks also provides simulation-based leadership development for top companies and large nonprofits to stay ahead of change and discover new ways of doing business by cultivating business acumen, strategic agility, sustainability thinking, and leadership skills on the strategic and the individual level. Today, Laura will lead us to rounds of polling exercises on the concept of sustainable value framework. Through that, we would learn that leading business towards sustainability is not only about the practice method, but also about mentality. Our third great panelist is Dr. Feng Chang. Feng has 15 years of working experience on Wall Street. She is the managing director of a US investment bank, leading the Department of Fixed Income Trading. Feng holds a PhD degree in quantitative finance at Imperial College, London. Feng's presentation topic for today is how to let go of your outdated mindset, an individual perspective of business transformation towards sustainability. So finally, let me highlight the pta-plant program here. pta-plant leading the sustainability transformation powered by WholeWorks is a 10-week online professional development program. It includes a variety of individual and team-based learning activities. The learn, practice, apply model connects all three components in a way that immediately bring cutting-edge concept and skills to life and ensure that participants have the experience they need to be effective at applying sustainable business strategies and tactics within their organization and beyond. Now let's welcome Stuart, Laura, and Feng. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Barbara. What a nice introduction.
Thank you, Laura.
I'm going to share my screen here. So this is always a little tricky to get to this. So you should all be seeing my slides now. And we are going to start to talk about the sustainable value framework and how to apply it. And this is one of the main frameworks and strategies that we introduce in leading the sustainability transformation, which, as Barbara has pointed out, is a professional certificate program that we make available in partnership with PTA. And we're so fortunate to have the person who developed the sustainable value framework here today to talk us through, and it's Dr. Stuart Hart. So Stuart, it's just wonderful to be here with you. So I have the slides and I'm going to progress with them now, and you just let me know when you'd like me to move on.
Perfect, Laura. Thank you so much. And Barbara and Feng, a pleasure to be working with you today, and greetings everyone. What I'll do is take a few minutes just to sort of talk our way through, this framework as a vehicle for thinking about sustainability in the context of business performance. Because I guess I began with the realization, now going back to the 90s, really is when this framework first emerged. And I'll have to say, somewhat tragically, it's even more relevant today than it was in the 90s, and you'll see why in a moment. But I began with the recognition, with the realization that if the challenges around sustainability, global sustainability, environment, social equity and so forth, were ever going to get traction in business, then it was necessary to understand much more clearly how they relate to performance, and particularly financial performance. So coming out of that, I began with the idea of, well, what's a simplified way of framing what drives value, what drives shareholder value, right, as the starting point. And you can think of this model that I'll explain in a moment as kind of a much simpler version of the balanced scorecard, because rather than just thinking about short-term performance, quarterly earnings, rather I took the perspective of what does it take to drive long-term value, right? Long-term value, yes, in terms of public equities, publicly owned companies, but I think the same logic applies to all companies, regardless of their governance structure. So you can see from this, this pretty simple 2x2 that there are two dimensions, right? There's a time frame dimension, and I'll use the term time frame as distinct from time, because the vertical dimension, you can see the bottom part. Obviously, any business must manage today's business well. I mean, kind of a simple-minded observation, but any business must do that, while at the same time also building tomorrow's opportunities. And so that's why I say it's about time frame, not time. This is not it's not the case that you can focus all your attention on just managing today's business and worry about tomorrow's opportunities tomorrow. These two things must happen simultaneously, and they're somewhat paradoxical because they require a different perspective and a different set of skills. And that will be key to this way of thinking. The horizontal axis has more to do with the locus of activity. Where is activity going on? And on the left-hand side, you can see there are a set of actions that have to do more with the internal technologies, competencies, capabilities, skills inside the firm, inside the organization. And it's important to develop, competencies, skills, routines that you can deliver on in a consistent and reliable way. But at the same time, on the right-hand side, it's important for every business, every company to be sensitive to what's going on out there in the world with external constituencies and stakeholders. And of course, these two things are also, in creative tension with each other. Because every time you open your ears to external perspectives, they can be disruptive to what you currently already know how to do or the skills that you're building inside the company. And these two things must also be held in creative tension. And that then translates into these four quadrants of, just to start with, what does it take to drive long-term shareholder value? What are the performance dimensions? So in the lower left, you can see around managing today's business and what are the internal capabilities and skills. Those have everything to do with driving down cost and reducing risk, right, in today's business. That's the kind of the today's business internal quadrant. And every company must do that in order to drive value long-term. But that's clearly not sufficient. Companies or businesses must also be concerned with what's happening externally out there in the business, particularly with, upstream with suppliers, downstream with customers, what happens with their products or services and use. And that's all about building reputation and legitimacy, preserving right to operate at a minimum, differentiating products and so forth. And so the lower right quadrant has to do with those dimensions of value creation. But the bottom two quadrants, as important as they are to driving value in the long term, are really only about today's business. At the same time, every company must be in the upper left quadrant, building new skills, building new capabilities, acquiring new technologies in order to position for the future. Because the simple fact is that nothing lasts forever. If you simply focus all your attention on managing today's business more efficiently and effectively and efficiently, eventually you will, sort of the metaphor would be, you're going to fly that plane into the ground. Nothing lasts forever, so you must be continuously developing new skills and capabilities in order to reposition the company for the future, and that has to be happening at the same time you're managing today's businesses. But even that's not enough, right? It's quite possible to be very good, spending a lot of money on R&D, building new capabilities with people, new skills and capabilities inside the company. But unless those relate well to what the external growth possibilities, what the growth path and trajectory is in the upper right quadrant, you're never able to successfully connect these new internal skills with external market potential. So finding and being able to really zero in on where the growth path and trajectory for the future lies is also very important when it comes to building long-term shareholder value. So if we start with this as kind of the base model, think of this as, again, a simplified version of the balanced scorecard. This is the starting point, right? In terms of what it takes for any business to drive value, shareholder value on a long-term basis. And hopefully that makes sense. I think it's pretty simple-minded. It's not at all path-breaking what I've just described. But so keep that in mind. And if we go to the next slide, Laura, this is where now we kind of bring in the challenges around sustainability. And I think the idea here of the sustainable value framework is to overlay, interweave, to show the connection points between, you know, that base model of what drives financial or shareholder value and the challenges around global sustainability, environment, social equity, and so forth. And we'll go through each one of these one at a time, but I just wanted to give you again a flavor for this overall framework. The lower part of this model, and you can see down in italics, you know, are those sort of shareholder value corporate payoffs, I'm calling them, right? You can see cost and risk and innovation and repositioning and so forth in italics. The rest of it now is kind of bringing in the sustainability challenges. And the lower part of the model, you know, consistent with what I've just described, has to do, you know, in terms of sustainability with the reduction of negative impact, right, in today's business. It's more of a continuous improvement way of thinking about things. You know, it's how do we, in the words of Bill McDonough, some of you may know Bill McDonough's work, how do we ensure or how do we make the company or the business or the products of the business less bad, you know, to have less negative impact. That's really the focus of the bottom part of this model. And as I say, I'll spend a lot more time on each of these quadrants. The upper part of the model has to do with driving innovation, right? As you might expect, you know, which is possible then to open the aperture and think more in terms of how you, in thinking about the future, how do you become more good, right? How can you innovate such that you're creating more positive impact in the world, not just reducing negative impact in today's business? So again, this model is premised on the idea of an ongoing company, right? Sort of an already existing business that has a base business, a set of core businesses that they're looking to continuously improve, which would be the bottom part, but also thinking about tomorrow's business at the same time, which would be the top part of the model. And when it comes to that, you can think much more creatively about how to be more good. Now, for a new venture, of course, it's possible to leap directly more to the top part of the model, right? As you think about framing the business opportunity from the beginning. But this model in its totality really is geared toward ongoing enterprises, companies that already have existing businesses, if that makes sense. And when you take all of those together, right, sort of the confluence or combination of all of these things will drive the creation of, you know, what I call sustainable value. So we can walk through each one of these quadrants briefly now. So Laura, if we go ahead and go to the next slide. So the lower left quadrant, and you know, these I think these roughly correspond to how this has unfolded in the world over time. You know, that I think it's fair to say that where businesses first confronted the challenge of sustainability going back 30 plus years was in this lower left quadrant that I'll call pollution prevention. But this has everything to do with the idea of eco-efficiency, you know, that we saw rising pollution, waste, and so forth. And the idea of innovating internally with current operations to minimize waste and emissions from operations. This is all about eco-efficiency. This is all about reducing negative impact from operations, from the company's own facilities. And this is where it all began, you know, going back to the late 80s and early 90s. You know, in the US, it was in the chemical industry with the likes of 3M and Dow and DuPont and so forth, which became leaders in this space. And while this has now become very well developed in many companies, there's still plenty of room to run. I'd say in China, in state-owned enterprises, in a lot of SMEs, they're just beginning to scratch the surface when it comes still to pollution prevention. Bigger, more established companies may be kind of reaching more of the level of diminishing returns when it comes to this, you know, that there are a set of initiatives that you can take inside the company that yield big reductions in waste and cost savings and risk reduction. But after you've sort of plucked that so-called low-hanging fruit, then over time it becomes somewhat more difficult to find those same kinds of opportunities. So there's a diminishing returns curve when it comes to this strategy of pollution prevention, driving down cost and risk. And for a lot of, you know, companies that have been at it a long time, they're beginning to reach that, I'd say, you know, and that's what's driven, you know, I'd say the continuous search for more opportunities, which takes us now to the lower right quadrant, Laura, if we can go to the next slide. You know, obviously just from the structure of this model, this takes us now thinking more externally, right? If pollution prevention was focused inside the gate, you know, on the company's own operations and facilities, product stewardship focuses on what's, you know, everything else outside. Upstream, where do the raw materials come from? How are we sourcing? How are we thinking about the sustainability of sourcing and supply chains? Downstream, what's the impact of our product in use or service in use? What happens if we have a tangible product? What happens to it at the end of its useful life? How do we take it back? Does it end up in a landfill? So this has everything to do with the ideas of sustainable sourcing, of life cycle analysis and thinking, of closed loop, of to some degree circularity, although we'll talk more about that in the context of innovation in the upper left in a moment. Because this is assuming current products, right? Current product markets. How do we reduce the negative impact of the entire life cycle of the entire product system, from sourcing all the way out to product use and end of product life? It involves engaging with stakeholders, in making sure we're engaging with suppliers, with customers, with interest groups, with NGOs, those concerned about environment, those concerned about the impact of the product, with governments and so forth. So product stewardship is a big idea and is being driven, by the need for more transparency, greater connectivity. The more connectivity there is, the harder it is to hide for companies. So being clearer in terms of the life cycle impact of the product is really important, or else it can result in nasty surprises, coming from those who might push back on what you're doing. And you can think of product stewardship, on the supply chain side, a lot happening these days in the food and agricultural space around sustainable agriculture and regenerative agriculture, working with smallholder farmers to ensure, kind of greater sustainability and livelihood generation. That also will relate to the upper right, which I'll get to in a moment. But, also in terms of manufacturing and manufactured products, the idea of life cycle design, this is also an area where product take back becomes really important. And you're thinking about the life cycle impact of your product. I think something highly relevant to China here, as an example, would be, say, the aluminum industry, where, China makes half of the world's aluminum, as I'm sure many of you know. With some of the really big aluminum producers like Chalco and Hongqiao and so forth, which are driven a lot by coal-fired primary aluminum production. But if China is actually going to reach its carbon neutral goal by 2060, that's going to have to change in a pretty significant way. So we look at some innovators, like in the US, there's a company called Novelis, which is the result of a demerger of Alcan, which happened, now 15 years back or so. But starting about 10 years ago, Novelis, which was essentially Alcan demerged, and they spun off the upstream, the mining part of it, right? The primary aluminum mining and bauxite and so forth, to Rio Tinto, which is a mining company. And all all of the, the rolling mills and downstream and more customer facing assets ended up in this new company. It was at the time viewed as kind of like the waste product of this demerger. It's like they thought the value was in the mining assets. And so they created another company called Novellus that took on all of the downstream assets. And it turns out that's where the real value was because they brought in a new CEO. They brought in the guy who's formerly the chief technology officer at Ford Motor Company to be the CEO. And he was able to, over a period of 5 or 6 years, put in place kind of a vision, a purpose and a vision for this new company Novellus that was to turn it into the world's first above ground aluminum company, where we're going to move, at the time they took back, it was about 20% recycled aluminum content at the time. And he set the audacious goal that it become 80% recycled aluminum by 2020, right? That's this year. They didn't quite make that, that's a long story, but they've been able to move the needle in a very significant way. And the big, hairy, audacious goal in terms of product stewardship is to become the world's first above ground miner, right? Where they don't source any primary aluminum from bauxite. And if you make aluminum that way, it reduces energy use and greenhouse gas emissions by 95%. So it's a very significant positive impact. And so this to me is one of the most interesting and radical strategies for product stewardship that I know of, because it also drives down the cost of production at the same time. So it's truly a virtuous circle. For China, I think this is going to be highly relevant, right? For China's big primary aluminum producers, this is something they're going to have to take on in a very substantial way in the coming years. And it's, and it is a product stewardship strategy. And not only drives reputation, legitimacy, which it does, but it can also be a source of competitive advantage at the same time, I think, as Novellus is beginning to prove. So, Laura, if we go to the next slide, because this sort of really extreme, I'll call it an extreme product stewardship strategy, borders closely on what I'll talk about next, which is now we've shifted internal again, right, in terms of thinking about clean technology. Because when you think about it, what Novellus is doing is acquiring a whole new set of internal capabilities to become essentially an aluminum recycling company, right? That it looks, their whole kind of asset configuration and capabilities and competencies are different than a conventional primary aluminum bauxite producing company. That starts to border on, what I'll call clean technology, which has to do with developing and deploying the sustainable competencies of the future. And in many cases, that means creatively destroying the current base business as it's configured. I talked a bit at the beginning about pollution prevention. If we think about, a mundane industry, for example, like dry cleaning, right? Everyone probably gets their clothes dry cleaned. Well, you think about the conventional dry cleaning is done with a very toxic chemical called perchloroethylene, PERC. And most dry cleaners are still smaller. It's still a fragmented industry, with smaller mom and pop dry cleaners. And most of them don't have the resources to think about fundamental innovation. So most of them have used pollution prevention. How can we dry clean using less PERC, right? So we create less waste, less emissions. But there's an emerging industry, right, of new players that are leapfrogging into new dry cleaning technologies using things like liquid CO2 and new soaps and surfactants that can be reused in a liquid. If you put CO2 under pressure, it turns to a supercritical liquid. And there are certain soaps and surfactants that work really well in that environment to clean clothes. And then you simply take the pressure off the CO2 and it goes back into the tank as, you're able to reuse the CO2. So you're not emitting CO2 to the atmosphere. And then you can reuse those soaps after you clean the clothes. There are a whole set of new players that have entered the dry cleaning space with that technology. This is an example of a clean technology, right? Which will ultimately make the old dry cleaning PERC-based toxic chemical industry obsolete. That's a leapfrog clean technology deployment of a new technology that disrupts the industry as it's currently given. We can see all kinds of examples of this happening out in the world these days, be it plant-based proteins in the food space, with players like Impossible and Dust and Beyond Meat in the US, and plenty of others happening out there in the world. Again, we can see it with extreme product take back and reuse strategies like Novellus is bordering on this in terms of circularity. But a company like in the US, a company like Interface, which is a commercial carpet company, for a long time now has been taking back their old carpet tiles from, commercial sites, buildings and so forth, to take that material back and redeploy it into new carpet backing, for example. But recently, Interface has produced a new carpet product called Sequest, which is actually designed and uses materials that sequester carbon. In other words, this new carpet tile product over its life cycle and the way it's produced and the materials that it uses actually is carbon negative. It's sequestering carbon in the product, right, over the course of the product life cycle. So it begins to look like a clean technologies or even a regenerative technology in this space. Obviously, the whole renewable energy and electric vehicle, that emerging industry is an example of this, and this is really important for China. Clearly, that's the case, with, a really vital electric vehicle industry, with the likes of BYD and Great Wall and Byton and NIO and so forth. And this is a really important kind of future industry that will creatively destroy, and we already see it happening, right? The big auto companies, established players are one by one saying it's time for the internal combustion engine to go, even GM, right? And when General Motors says that it's time for the internal combustion engine to go, you know that something fundamental is happening. Not to mention the Teslas and so forth, and in the US. So this gives you a flavor for what a clean technology strategy is all about, right? And it's all about creative destruction and disruption of the current industry and deploying new competencies that are inherently clean and regenerative. Which then takes us, Laura, to the final quadrant, the upper right quadrant. Because as I mentioned at the outset, you can develop a new technology, and I mentioned General Motors. I think General Motors is famous for doing great work internally, spending a lot of money on R&D, developing these incredible technologies, and then never being able to effectively figure out how to market it, how to actually get it into products that customers would want to buy. So it's really important to be able to cross that chasm and open up new market space, right? If clean technology is about new competencies, then the upper right quadrant is about what's the new market space of the future. And I'll call it base of the pyramid because it represents essentially the underserved, poorly served, or ignored spaces and people of the world, right? That could be left behind communities in deindustrialized parts of America, for example, like Detroit, which Laura and I know well. I'm sitting here in Ann Arbor, Michigan right now, outside of Detroit. And it could also be those people left behind from the industrialized world, like, those deindustrialized workers, whose plants have been closed. But equally well, it's all about the underserved at the base of the income pyramid in the emerging markets and developing world as well. It's the rural population in Western China, right? It's rural India, it's urban slum and shantytown dwellers in India or Latin America or Africa, or it's rural Africa, or it's megacity populations in slums and shantytowns. These are the poorly served, underserved, in some cases actively exploited or forgotten places and peoples of the world. That's what the base of the pyramid is all about. That's where the growth potential is, right? So if product stewardship is about serving current customers and continuously improving current products, the upper right quadrant is about opening up and creating new market space for the poorly served and underserved. That's what this is all about. And of course, we've seen, the microcredit industry explode, over the past 20 or 30 years. And now, digital technology and mobile phone service, has become a growth business. The Grameen Phone maybe being one of the most famous companies that have created the largest company in Bangladesh, right, is Grameen Phone, from serving the underserved in rural Bangladesh, the unconnected, the underserved in rural Bangladesh. I mentioned, the idea of regenerative farming and working with smallholders. This is, I think, where the food and ag companies are, right? How do we actually create, viable smallholder farming communities that deliver living wages so we can source sustainably for the future when it comes to food and agriculture. It's all about pro-poor, inclusive business, social entrepreneurship, and so forth. But just like with Grameen Phone, it applies equally well, I'd say, in the technology space too. So one of the companies that because I've done, I've done my share of traveling in China over the years. I got to know, because I'm actually an honorary professor at Tsinghua University. So I've gotten to know Tsinghua Solar as a company a bit and knew its origin story, which is a very interesting origin story for those of you that know the company. It's one of the innovators in solar hot water, right? Solar and solar thermal. And it was a technology that spun out of Tsinghua University. It's this innovative glass technology, right? That can capture the sun's energy and heat very effectively at low cost to make hot water. It's essentially these glass tubes that stick into a water tank and heat the water, but it's very sophisticated technology at the same time. And initially, Tsinghua Solar, thought they were able to get venture money. They thought their market was going to be, with the up market, in Beijing and Shanghai and so forth, the sort of emerging wealthy that were going to be green conscious and so forth. And of course, that turned out to be completely wrong, right? Because those people already have hot water. Why would they? Why would they have a need for this hot water tank? They already have hot. So after burning through a lot of their startup capital, almost out of desperation, they went out to the rural areas. They went out to the towns, and they realized that's where the early market was. It was in the underserved space. They had to adapt the technology for that, because in many cases, it wasn't just at the home level, right? It was with entrepreneurs that needed hot water in order for their business to be successful. And that's where they found the early market, right? For this new technology, this solar hot water technology. And it's what produced their real growth curve, right? As the company was just getting off the ground. A rapidly growing industry just in China for a long time, which I think is now beginning to become a global industry. So I think it's an example of where China has been a leader in incubating, creating new markets, using inherently clean technology to drive new market creation to serve the underserved, right, at the base of the income pyramid. And that's a good example of it. So let me just finish, because I realize I probably talked longer than I should, Laura, with the last slide, which looks at this in its totality, because you can think of this as a portfolio. Again, for any existing company that has a core business, a base business, you need to decide, right, where you're going to deploy resources. Which of these 4 strategies are you going to pursue? Are you going to pursue all 4? In what proportion? Where should your energy go? And that's going to have real implication for how well the company does in the future in terms of creating shareholder value, I would argue. And we can see just from experience, you compare an ExxonMobil over the last 20 years or 10 years, where, 20 years ago, ExxonMobil was the market cap leader in the US. And today it's basically traded places with Tesla. In terms of market cap, they've reversed each other. Tesla, is now, I think, the 3rd most valuable company in the US and is worth more in market cap than all of the US auto companies combined. That tells you something. And if you think about where their investments are on the sustainable value framework, what their portfolio is, we know where Tesla is, more the upper part, and we know where ExxonMobil is, right? So I say that just because thinking about what the portfolio of the sustainable value framework is going to be is a really important strategic decision for companies to make. And it's something that we'll have a chance to talk about a little bit more as we get into some questions, I think, that Laura will be walking us through now. So with that, let me stop and thank everyone and look forward to talking more about it.
Well, thank you, Stu. I'm sitting here listening to you again for probably the 100th time to deliver this talk, because I've, as everybody knows, I've already shared Stu's link to Stu's book and told everybody it's a really good book. It really informed my strategy and the work that I do today almost completely. And the sustainable value framework is one of the areas in which I thought, oh, I get it now. I get now what I can do. And so the next part of our program today is to actually help you place yourself in the sustainable value framework. So I just want you to know it's great for everybody who's on the phone today or on the call today to look at the sustainable value framework and say, oh yes, I can see the work that my organization or my company is doing in each one of those quadrants. So you don't have to pick a quadrant. You can be in all four. That's great. We would love to see that. But what I really hope to get to by the end of this little exercise is that you can see yourself in at least one. And if you can't, you can link in with me and send me a note and we'll talk about it, because this is the thing that I think is so important. If we want to talk about integrating sustainability across organizations, across industries, and across communities, then we have to put leaders in a position where they can envision themselves in these kinds of strategies and to be able to articulate them to other people to drive the kind of behavior that is required for a virtuous cycle, which is a thriving organization, community, industry with regards to profit, people, and planet. That's what we want to get to. So what I've done is I've written a couple of questions to get you all to think about, where is this? What quadrant would this be in? So we're experimenting a little bit today, Barbara and I, because we're also going to use the Zoom technology to poll all of you. So the first question is this: a large manufacturing operation is investing in new technologies and processes to reduce the total amount of water used in their process and recycling the water that it does use. So if you look at this example, what is this the best example, or what quadrant is this the best example for? So Barbara, you want to launch that poll for the first question?
Yeah.
All right, tell me when you've launched it, because if I have to stop sharing, I will.
Okay. I launched it already now.
There it is. Okay.
Yeah.
So here's the question, everyone. Everybody should be able to see it. So we're voting now. So a large manufacturing operation is investing in new technologies and processes to reduce the total amount of water used in their process and recycling the water it does use. So this is an example of a strategy of which quadrant. So I see 5 of 35 of you have voted. So keep going.
Yeah.
We're gonna just have a little have a little. We should have had a little music here, but don't worry, I won't sing to you. All right. So we've got about a third of the people. So we'll give you another moment.
Yep.
Don't worry, we're not tracking you and you don't get any bad marks. Okay. All right, Barbara, I think we've got 20 people have voted, so that's good. So
Okay.
if you want to end the poll and show everybody what we said. Okay, so the point that came out here was clean technology was about half. A couple of people thought it was the base of the pyramid, and about 40% of people thought it was pollution prevention. So if you want, Barbara, you can stop sharing the poll now. We'll just close that and we'll go to the next slide. So I'm going to close it. So actually, this is an example. No, I'm going to see if I can.
Did I close it?
Yeah, go ahead and close it.
Okay.
I had to click on it to close it. I clicked on the X.
All right. So it actually is an example of it's an example of pollution prevention, although it did talk about new technology and it did talk about technology that was cleaner. So I can see where some folks would have put it up here in this quadrant. It's very clearly on the internal capability side. And I'm just wondering, Stu, if you can give us a few comments on that particular example.
Yeah, that was good the way you worded it, because there's a little bit of a trick question there, Laura, which is good. That yeah, because you use the words new and technology, right? And new technologies, but I think the key is reducing, right? The reducing total amount of water used in their process and recycling the water. So it's continuously improving the current process, right? It's making the current process less bad. It's pollution prevention, right? You can use all kinds of new technologies and methods in pollution prevention. That's absolutely the case, right? Pollution prevention involves innovation. It just involves incremental innovation, right? This is not, you know, this manufacturing company has not creatively destroyed its entire process so that it's water positive.
Right. So that's a really great point, and I appreciate that, Stu. So we're going to have a Q&A, a question and answer later. So please feel free to write down your questions. If any of you are putting them in the chat, I just want you to know we can't see those right now because of the way that we're sharing the slides and polling. But I also want to add that here, in terms of reducing energy, reducing water, reducing raw materials, you know, limiting pollution, minimizing waste, minimizing emissions. All of those things are sometimes not very sexy, but they're really important. And if you're working in a company or in an industry that hasn't started there, start there, because those savings can fund then the rest of your portfolio. When I worked for the Dow Corning Corporation, we used the sustainable value framework to frame our portfolio. And when we started, our chief manufacturing officer was responsible for that quadrant of pollution prevention. And there were a lot of expensive capital projects there that have really paid off. And because they've paid off, then they open up more capability for funding other parts of the portfolio. Okay, so I'm going to move to the next question. The next question is that a bank enters a new country and the government requires their services to be available to 80% of the population. Many of those people have never used a bank. So the bank works with a community nonprofit to understand needs and develops products and programs for first-time customers. This is an example of which quadrant? So Barbara, can you launch that second question, please?
Right.
And again, we're going to take about a few minutes here to take a look at that and have everyone, I hope everyone will participate. Please take the opportunity to vote for the one that you think makes the most sense. Going to encourage everyone to have an opportunity to weigh in. The 4 answers are clean technology, base of the pyramid or co-creation, pollution prevention, and stakeholder engagement.
We can give everybody 10 more seconds.
Okay, Barbara, it looks like we've got about 20 people having voted. Do you want to go ahead and share the results of the poll?
Okay, yeah, sure. So I'm sharing the poll results. Laura, are you muting your system?
I'm not sure what happened. I think I fell off the meeting there momentarily, but here we have clean technology is 4%, base of the pyramid, or co-creation is about 2/3 of the votes, and product stewardship or stakeholder engagement is about 1/3. So Stu, I wonder if you can comment on this while I go ahead and share my screen again.
Yeah. So this came down to a decision about whether it's base of the pyramid or product stewardship, right? And fundamentally, and there, I think the watchword is it continuously improving an existing product and product market, or is it looking to open up entirely new and create new market space with new, less well-served or underserved customers? And if it's the latter, the new opening up new market space, bringing on new customers that you previously haven't served or that have been underserved, then it tilts toward the base of the pyramid end of things, right? So I think this is a base of the pyramid example. If it were product stewardship, it would have much more to do with better serving with lower impact and reducing the footprint of current customers.
Okay, thanks, Barbara. You can close that poll.
Oh, I thought I closed it already. Sorry.
Oh, okay, maybe you did. All right. And I'm gonna stop
It also
sharing
has
here
the
for a moment.
co-creation angle, right, of working with a community organization, right, to kind of help imagine what the new product or service would need to look like. So there's often or should be a co-creation element, where you're engaging with those underserved populations in order to have a better understanding of what such a product or service would be or need to be.
Well, and we've got then our next poll is this one about local farmers who cannot consistently supply a food company with quality strawberries. This interrupts the company's supply to their customers, and they work with farmers to develop new farming approaches and organize a cooperative. So we've got another poll to launch here, Barbara, the third one.
Yeah.
So, okay, if you can take a look at this question and answer the question where local farmers cannot consistently supply a food company with a quality product. So they work with farmers to develop new farming approaches. So what is this an example of? Again, we've got the 4 quadrants of clean technology, base of the pyramid, pollution prevention, and product stewardship and stakeholder engagement. I appreciate everybody taking a look at this and trying to put themselves in this position and selecting the quadrant. Okay, Barbara, you want to share the results of this poll?
Yes. Here we go.
Okay. Yeah, so here the vast majority was about product stewardship and stakeholder engagement, although there were a few people that were thinking clean technology and base of the pyramid. So Stu, would you like to comment on that, on this one?
Yeah. So this one, does involve, right, kind of working with upstream suppliers for them to improve what they're doing. Perhaps, hopefully, with less impact. Perhaps it's less negative impact farming. Perhaps it's lowering cost or improving quality. But having said that, it's all about ensuring that you're able to better supply current customers in a current market, and looking at the entire value chain. In this case, focused on the upstream part with the supply base. So I think it's a product stewardship strategy.
Well, and the thing that I really appreciate that you commented on in your talk today, Stu, was the point about supply chain being a critical part of product stewardship. Yeah. Because so many times people look at their value chain and their distribution and their life cycle and end of life, and they don't consider their sourcing. So it's really important. I was really happy that you made those comments today about both sourcing and distribution and life cycle. Okay, I think I'm going to just do one more question here, Barbara, so that we can move to Feng, and because it's taken a little bit longer. So I'm just going to have one more question here, one more polling question. Electric vehicles are more environmentally friendly than gas-powered cars, but only if the electricity is generated from a clean source. So here, this is an example of a company that develops a car paint with nano solar cells, so very tiny solar cells, to generate electricity, which then charge the vehicle's battery. This is an example of which quadrant? So Barbara, can you share the fourth question? Okay, so this will be the last question that I ask today. So again, I'm hoping that taking a look at some of these questions and selecting the quadrant help you also then to make a connection of the work that you're doing or could be doing to fit into a sustainable value framework and a sustainable value creation portfolio. Okay, so we've got it dueling between clean technology and pollution prevention. So clearly a technology play. Okay, Barbara, can you share the poll results? It looks like clean technology is the clear winner there.
Yeah.
And I'll just ask you one more time, Stu, if you can comment on that as well.
Yeah, I think they got it right.
They got it right too.
This has everything, and in some ways it's a double clean technology, right? In the sense that yes, electric vehicles themselves, right, have the potential through deep electrification, and sort of making internal combustion engine and fossil fuel combustion obsolete. That's a leapfrog or a disruption unto itself. But as the question says, if the electric vehicles are powered by electricity that's unsustainably produced, like coal-fired electricity, we got a problem. So this is a way potentially of bringing a technology which renewably recharges the vehicle's battery, right? So it's a double clean technology.
great. So I'm gonna, if we can close that one down, then you can see that there's the answer that we had for clean technology. So we've gone through all 4 quadrants and looked at some examples. I'm going to skip through some of the other questions that I had because I don't want to take up so much more time. What I did want to say is that this is an example of sustainability frameworks that we introduce in the Leading the Sustainability Transformation professional certification program, which we partner with PTA to provide. It is part of our online learning modules. So the things that we just went through today are one of our online learning modules. I also have a PDF for you. Barbara has it. It will be sent to everyone who's registered for this session today. We go from learning to practicing, putting the sustainability framework into practice through a simulation that takes our teams 10 weeks to complete a 20-year simulation. So they get to practice that. And then each one of the participants also develops a project in which we coach them through. A lot of this has to do with how can you fit in the sustainable value framework into an organization that it's important to you. So Barbara, I want to thank you so much for including Stu and I in this part of the program. And I am really delighted to hear next from Feng Chang because she is a graduate of our program and it has been wonderful to participate with her.
Thank you so much, Stuart. Thank you, Laura.
Hi and hello. For those of you who joined late, my name is Fan, and I work in investment banking for more than 15 years now. And recently I transited to sustainable finance. I just completed my LST course. And then it's so great to hear Stuart to go to review, this framework again. It's just yeah, wonderful. And then I think all of those business cases you just give, I think that redefines what is possible in our opinion. So this framework is really one of my big takeaway during the course. Personally, I actually think it serves me really well in the 2 levels. One is for the companies and the business that I invest in. It really gives me a new tool to audit them, to look at their strategies. And then the other one is when I work for my own organization, or when I support for the social enterprise like a PTA, NGOs, I can ask the right questions on their strategies and then think whether they actually think about today and then tomorrow. So I think in the next 10-15 minutes, I will share a few things, what I actually take, what I get from the LST course. And one thing is also is what I have been always practicing, and then try to support. So when we have a knowledge and how we actually implement them into the real case. So Barbara, if you could share the slides, okay, that'd be great.
Yep. Oh, you got it?
Yeah, I got it. Next one, please. Thank you. And the next one, yeah. Yeah, so we start from this interesting picture I saw the other day when I read in the magazine, right? So who led the digital transformation of your company? You probably think it's your CEO, your CTO, but unfortunately, is the pandemic, right? And I think what you're really saying is in most of the time, and for the organization, for the individual, is we're so busy react or deal with circumstances and issues coming up every day, rather than planning for the future. So planning for the future particularly for something that hasn't happened, you know, I think that alone, it not only requires the knowledge, technology, and actually, fortunately, a lot of knowledge and technology, we have it there. You know, Stuart has really great books and things 10, 20 years ago. But what more is we also need to remove those barriers. And here, what Barbara said, you know, the outdated mindset, in order to for those technologies and knowledge implement into the business successfully. So if you go to the next one, I asked many business leaders, what do they mean by transformation? Because these days, every business is talking about transformation. Most people tell me is, oh, go digital. Or, oh yeah, cutting people, become lean. That is what they mean by the transformation. So when I took this LST course, what I found is that's not what we mean by the transformation. It was really saying, you don't come here to get the right answer. But more importantly, it is about a kind of ability to really have dialogues, particularly when they involve multi-stakeholders. And then you have that ability to have dialogue, and then you can explore the options, you frame your questions, and then you provide the choices for people to make the decisions, and then to create something it probably never happened before. And then you have that breakthrough or have that innovation only in the organizational level at scale. So that's more what we talk about, saying the transformation in the LST course, what I have learned, whether these organizations have that space, you have that space for this happen. So if you could go to the next one. So 3 things here is I took from the LST. And then to me, that was really kind of changed the way how I look at the things. The first one is past, present, and the future. And then all the time, these 3 states, and then they interlinked. And then the past doesn't just always stay in the past, right? Because every day, for example, when we invest in a company, and when we decide on which company to, when I look at a company to invest, is I invest in their future, right? A lot of the startup companies, when I just look at their present, none of them I should invest them, but it's more is I invest in their future. However, but when I look at their future, it's not just saying I look at their future. A lot of times I bring my past experience and then to predict that in the future. So it looks like all the time I'm managing in the present, but actually all of these 3 states is showing up. That's why, when I went into the course say you have to simultaneously manage the 3 states. That was shocking to me. I still remember the first 2 weeks, and when we running this simulation to run a paper company, I went in with this strong idea. First of all, we have to make money. If we don't make money, there's no way to talk about taking care of the planet and the community. So I have this idea we need to make money. And that was my past view. And from my past experience, then I went all in, trying to convince my global, the whole team, said we should do that. And rather than saying, have a dialogue, let's see what works, what doesn't work. But, I'm very coachable. Laura kept reminding me, Fan, there's no right answer here, right? And then I slowly getting into this. Okay, actually the 3 states have to be managed all the time. So we need to manage the present. We need to be really laser focused on a daily basis how we actually provide a type of product or services that make us different. so that we can compete for the market share, right? And we need to gather the data. We need to make people, we all have a different role, and people is accountable, and each one of us is responsible for a result. So we're truly there to manage these in the present. And then we need to selectively forget about the past. And then that's easy if the past was a failure, right? If I failed, I'm not going to do that. But interestingly, if the past was a success, that was very difficult to forget about it, because it really show up reinforcing, saying that's the right business model that makes money. And then how could you say you need to forget the past, right? So my success is putting a cap, a lead for me to have a future in innovation. And then one of a few suggestions that we found very useful here is, Nana, you cannot just talk with core stakeholders, people who think the same, right? And people who do the same thing, and to reinforce your past ideas, rather than you have to talk with multiple stakeholders. And then the course introduced a very interesting idea, is the fringe stakeholders. Then the stakeholders, you normally don't even think that is relevant to your business, but they might actually have the answer for the issues for the product and services we're providing. So talking with the NGO, recently I'm thinking in Hong Kong is pretty hard to introduce this EV, electronic vehicle. If you talk with the companies, but then the NGO, what I was serving is a clean air network. They're talking with the government every day. And then they actually have a lot of insights on why it doesn't happen, what is the challenge there. But normally from the investment for the finance people, that's probably the last person they would think to talk to understand what's going on here. So this is what I'm saying, is forget the past by more kind of attuned to those weak signal, and I'm trying to listen to the non-traditional voices, and that kind of give a lot. And then the third one is create the future. And then here, you need to have a very big company saying, you need to create a white space. So when a company, particularly organizations, when I work for, typically is very matured in the company, everything, it has a process and a governance. In order to push for any new project, literally you have to get the entire layers of the approval. And then that make every idea, creating a new idea, and it's just feel like not possible, unbearable. But then if you could have this subunit on the white space, we call it, and then let that grow. And then for a moment, and we don't use a traditional immediate financial matrix to decide this is a viable idea or not, and maybe it will have a chance there. So that's saying simultaneously manage the three things at the same time. That's the number one thing I learned. And then so we did pretty well, right? We investing in our product, and then we also grow with our community, right? And then we always laser focus on the new technologies for the future, green technologies. So yes, so that's what I call simultaneously think about the three different states. Barbara, if you go to the next one. So the next one, what I get is gaining traction. This is also very interesting for me, because I would say I was quite used to in this high-performing individual state, having an idea, get it executed, and do it really good. But then a lot of these ideas, particularly in the sustainable world, it's very complex, it's new, and it really requires all of the different stakeholders to work together. Then how do we actually get that idea buy-in, get the traction? that's I actually think in the LST course, that's one of another piece of gold I got, right? When I have this great idea, and how do I actually make sure it can survive in the organization? Where do I start? So if I remember, Barbara, last time we actually had this webinar on the STAR model was particularly dedicated to explain, and when we have a strategy and when we want to implement them in an organization, and then what should we do? So briefly here, when I remember is that when you have a strategy, don't this Laura told me, don't have a strategy and then you basically go in trying to change the thing that your company currently doing. Right, I say I'm going to go, I have this new idea, it's totally different from our company currently doing. It might not really fly, but instead having something, try to align from the angle, this idea is aligned with the company's risk appetite. It potentially could reduce the cost, reach to more customers, basically align with the company's objectives, and particularly serving one of the objectives. And then that probably can get better support for the strategy and get the right people on the bus. And if you're not the CEO, I'm not a CEO, and then it is better to have somebody very senior in a company to sponsor this project, and then put on a structure. It's so important to have a structure and then to make sure it's more like the distribution of power and authority. And how do we make a decision? And then also not only in the process, right? When you implement something in a small scale, you kind of do want to make sure if it's successful, and then it can be easily scaled up later when we kind of want to apply it on an organization level. And then the rewards, I totally agree. I need to go beyond just the financial incentives. If for every new technology, new experiment, if we just look at the immediate financial rewards, maybe just a lot of them will not even happen. So in my own work, I do remember, for example, in terms of the strategy, I managed a very complex risk in the bank. So I remember if my strategy is preventing the risk, and then I realized I'm actually going against with most of the people who is the risk taker, and then it will be very hard to have that strategy. But if I go in with being together with people, how to take the right risk, instead of say preventing, I'm more going to work with all of the stakeholders and trying to identify where is the opportunity and we take the right risk. And in that way, all of a sudden it's just shifted. It will become it will become kind of getting together to looking for an opportunity. So it's much easier to implement, to collaborate with the whole organization to do that. So yeah, that's what I say about gaining traction. If Barbara could probably share the link, we do have a recording on in the last webinar, and which have a very detailed on each of these, these 5 things is on a STAR, and how that can be implemented into the business. I think that some of you might be interested. So the last one. Yeah, last one is integrity. So this one is what I and also the organization I'm with, what we try to practice. So why saying here, what I say in integrity is really have a very simple definition. It's just meaning you say something and then you honor your word. Very simple. And it's not morality, it's not the ethics. we don't say it's good or bad, right or wrong. But why, when I put this here, why it is even relevant, saying when we discuss of managing the business today and tomorrow? Because for me, I find it's relevant is a lot of times when I say I can't do both, is because I don't have resources. But when I do actually practice this, I actually find I have abundant of resources to get into the high performing stage. Meaning is when a company, they say they will do something and then they do it. They actually put all of their resources trying to make sure how that thing happen. But then when I see when the companies, when they declare they do something, but at the same time, they're really not committed, but they have to say they wanted to do it. That is getting into the area because all of a sudden, they probably have to do 3 and 4 things at the same time. They need to say they're doing it, but they also need to spend resources and say, what should we just do just enough? But we're not really fully committed. They also have to think about in case if we actually get to court, how should we justify all of this? You see, all of a sudden, the same resources, it has to be used for many, many things. That's why in the organization, it always feel we don't have enough people. We can't get it done. And then I remember even just on my individual level, if I promise, say, a customer, I'm going to get back to you on something, but I say I didn't honor, I forget about it. So next time when we have a meeting, I know in my mind, it's not just to say how I'm going to have a meeting with him. I will be thinking, oh, what should I say? Why I didn't get back to him? What is his perception on me? Right? How I'm going to explain that? Is he still wanting to do the business? It's just all of a sudden, right? And then my whole resources is being used on a lot of things and not even serving the very original business. So, and then we'll make it easy. So having the integrity as an individual, as a business, you say something and then you do it. And then integrity just means the workability. It either work or it doesn't work. And when it doesn't work, then we get together to discuss why it doesn't work. And then we change and we adjust our environment to make it work. This is one thing is practiced a lot in my LST course as well. Every week when a global team, when we meet, right? Sometimes our simulation, we went really well. We meet many targets. Sometimes we don't. But there was no blaming, say, why you said we should do that, why, right? Why that didn't happen? You said that will happen. It was no. We always start with, let's not look back. Let's just state the fact, what worked, what didn't work, and then what we want to continue doing, and then what we might want to adjust. I felt that really put our whole team, although we come from the different country, but that really put the whole team in the right space, and we're open. We want to try new ideas, rather than kind of thinking, right, if it's not going right, rather than into a different space. So that's why I actually put this integrity as one of the important things when you manage your business today and tomorrow. And of course, you will say, as a company, then which words should I say? And then that would be one of the other module in an LST is a house model, right? My favorite one. As a company, what should you declare? And then that's say why the company is here. Every company needs to declare why I am here. And when you declare that, and then you put all of the resources of doing that, I actually think that will create a very high performing organization and then to make things happen. So if Barbara is kind enough, maybe organize another webinar to go through the house model. So
Okay.
yeah, so that's my that's my takeaway. And I is so honored to be here with Stuart and Laura, and I really enjoyed the course, and it really brought me on new perspectives. of how I actually think about it in the business. Thank you.
Thank you, Feng. Thank you so much. Yeah, you have given us such a, the valuable insights and, learning experience. And many thanks to Stuart and Laura, to really expand the horizon of traditional shareholder value framework and uplift it to a new level and, to fit into the current global economic, social, even political, dynamics. So right now, I really want to invite our guests, to unmute your audio and open your camera and talk to our panelists, by, raising meaningful questions. And hopefully, we can still probably extend the meeting a little bit, and if everyone still have time. Is anybody have any question? You can either type into a box, the chat box, or just, raise your hand and let me see your face. Okay, so I think I have actually really a question. And so we just mentioned actually, there are so many trend in clean tech and other, the happening in the technology field. But the problem is that the high-tech driven economy and the knowledge-driven economy is already disrupted enough. So how could we convince these companies doing this high-tech R&D and the startups, address the importance of expanding their horizon to the sustainable value framework? I think this question might go to either Stuart or Laura.
Do you start?
Yeah, well, Barbara, in many ways, that's the trillion-dollar question.
Thank you.
And I guess the way that I look at it is that we really have no choice but to do that. Right? I guess I've become increasingly convinced that yes, we have an increasingly high velocity, innovation driven, digital technology, kind of oriented, kind of geared economy, platform economics, and so forth. All true, right? All true. But at the end of the day, to what end, right? The question becomes to what end? And I think we've arrived at a point in the world and in society where that question is actually being seriously asked. Like what really is the purpose of the economy, right? Can we think of the economy as some separate, sequestered, separated entity that has a life of its own apart from the rest of society? It never used to be that way, right? 100 years ago or 150 years ago, there was no such thing as the economy, right? I mean, there was society, there was political economy, right? But there was no such thing as, there was no conception of something called the economy as a separate thing. And I think that the fact that we ended up with 80 or 100 years where there was a separate field called the economics and the economy has led us to a really sorry state of affairs. And I think we're gradually coming back to the realization that we can't think of the economy apart from society. Those two things have to be integrated together. And the only way that the economy works is if it works for society. And that means that it's delivering value for everyone. And it means it's doing it in a way that doesn't destroy the underlying life support system that we all need. So I think it really comes down to, we don't really have a choice other than to engage those questions.
So I just want to comment on this question, Barbara, that you've asked, and also a great question from Sophie, which is the question that any of us who have worked in an established firm asks, which is, can you share more about existing companies doing disruptive innovations for clean development? For instance, what could be the key motivations for the aluminum company to go above the ground in China? And why would they want to give up mining part if it's still the cash cow? this is exactly what Feng was talking about. You have to manage today, you have to look for tomorrow. And if you have a visionary leader who is able to manage that tension, you will have a successful company. If you have a leader who refuses to look at that, you will not in the long run have a successful company. You know, one of the things that Stuart mentioned early on was the technology to make electric vehicles is actually, well, there's new technology to make electric vehicles, but that technology has been around for a really long time. The very first vehicle that Ford actually invented was an electric vehicle, right? And then they went to gas because they didn't have any way of generating electricity. And so it's actually the internal combustion engine actually generates electricity for the car. That's the way cars work. And that's it. That's the extent of my experience, except that I worked for General Motors before I went to work for Dow. And so I know that that company was always 35 years ago was very focused on the cars that they were making today, and they didn't want to deal with new technology. And that's one of the main reasons that General Motors went into bankruptcy, and the reason that Tesla is now, as Stu indicated earlier, a bigger market cap. I think it has everything to do with what we place our investments in. And one of the things that Feng talked about was, what do you do individually and what do you do organizationally? I think that companies that will continue to stay in the old way of doing things will have a difficult time attracting capital. I think they'll have a difficult time attracting talent. I come from the chemical industry. I spent, the better part of my professional career there. I lived with those people for 30 years. The plastics issue in chemical industry today is an existential threat. They have to figure out how to deal with that. And they are, they're trying to deal with it now. But Jim Fitterling, who is the CEO of Dow, has to manage two things. How does he keep his factories fully employed and generating a return? And how do they invest in technologies so that, I love, Stuart, when you talked about an above ground mining. I mean, there's another above ground source for polymer, right? So the answer is, so Sophie, there's no easy answer. I just wanted you to know that if you're working for somebody who doesn't have any white space there to think about anything for the future in any company, that's going to be a problem. I wouldn't invest there.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Present
Thank you,
is
Laura.
always more familiar and comfortable, right? Than as Feng was saying. Feng, as you were describing those 3 points, which I thought were just absolutely right on target, it reminded me a bit of my old colleague C.K. Prahalad, right? Who some of you, core competency, and so forth, but also C.K. and I wrote this piece called "The Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramid." But one of C.K.'s most favorite terms was, if you expect to be successful long term in business, you have to be able to not only climb the learning curve, but you also have to have a forgetting curve. Right? So I think a key part of this is you can't be intoxicated with what you know. You have to be able to climb the forgetting curve in order to get to the learning curve that will represent the future. Because it is what, it's the old adage of Wayne Gretzky, the hockey player, the reason that he said he was so good, he said, was because he honed the ability to skate to where the puck will be, not to where it is.
Right. Yeah. I think we still have one last question from Erica Chen. I know that Erica actually is from the business school for Renmin University. She's teaching there actually about the business strategy, more about the social enterprises. So she's asking that while it's very helpful to think, link, and apply the strategic value framework to firms' current practice, but as Professor Hart mentioned, it is oftentimes paradoxical and challenging to manage. So what would you suggest in terms of managing current practice involving the relevant people and at the same time explore new?
Well, I have an idea, and this is something that I really learned from Stu, right? This paradoxical challenge is always there, and it always has been there, and now it is just recast in view of sustainability. So I always appreciate Stuart saying, you know, you have to manage your business today, and you have to manage your business tomorrow. Every company needs to do that. Even if you pay no attention to sustainability, you have this paradox. What do we do today? What do we do tomorrow? And every business also has the paradox of saying, but I want to spend time developing our own products, but you know, but what does society need, or what do suppliers need? So you always have those paradoxes, I think. So Stu, maybe I just took your answer, but I just want you to know that I learned from you.
Yeah, and actually, you know, I think Feng, it would be interesting to hear your perspective on that question too, because that in you know, to a certain extent, that's really what you were speaking to.
Right. So that was like when I signed up the course, it says profit or purpose. You know, we really think that question is there, or because when I was asked the profit or purpose, I immediately get into this trade-off risk reward analysis, because I have to choose one of them. It wouldn't even come to me say profit and purpose. But after the course, I mean, that wasn't a question. It's a profit and the purpose. In fact, if I want to have a profit, it has to be a purpose there. Or, you know, put the other way is, I think the company, we always just say they need to have a legal license to operate. But these days, from so many examples, they also need to have this social license. Otherwise, they go just the same, you know, same termination as if they don't have a legal license. So yeah, so that's how I look at it. It's more profit and purpose rather than choose one.
Yeah, right. We got two more questions. One is from Katie. She asked actually in the mining industry, usually is very highly profitable, but at the same time, he's asking how actually keep mining, keep this industry to going smoothly with the mining environmental protections and regulations, you know, simultaneously, both at home and abroad. My suggestion will be just to, you know, invite your friends to come to LST program, you know, finish that program, and you will figure, I guess, the answer. But I would love to hear more from Feng or Laura, Stuart.
Well, I mean, I think the mining industry is now and will face, you know, some very important continuing questions, right? That, you know, that historically the idea of above ground mining didn't seem very practical or realistic, right? That and because we hadn't really designed products to, they hadn't been thought about, the full life cycle hadn't been thought about, so they were highly dispersed and difficult to get back, and so the idea of a collection infrastructure just seemed impractical, right? It just did. But so I've, you know, Novelis is a company that I've worked with over a period of time. And what I thought what made that so interesting is that they embarked upon that goal of the 80% goal, that they wanted to make their aluminum products 80% out of recycled aluminum. They set that goal in 2014, at which point they were 23% recycled. They set it for 2020. I mean, that they have not made that goal, but that shows you they didn't set a safe goal. But by setting it in such an audacious way, it sort of caused them to think in ways that they couldn't have imagined in 2013 or 14 about the potential of taking back used aluminum. You know, initially it was, well, we need to get every beverage can back in the world, and you know, okay, fair enough, right? Aluminum beverage cans you can get back, but there's so many other forms of waste aluminum out there that just rot on the landscape, that are not being, strangely enough, even waste pickers are not getting them back, right? That it caused them to actually kind of open the kimono, right? And really come to understand the full extent to which there are waste metals out there that are simply never recovered. and there's actually no good reason why they're not recovered, right? And so it's possible actually to think about creating a large world vacuum cleaner that gets all of the aluminum back and reuses it, because the simple truth is aluminum is an element. It can be infinitely reused, taken back to itself, because it is an element that doesn't degrade over time. And it just caused a complete rethinking of the whole idea of aluminum, right? And I think that's really what's behind this. It forces a reframing of what you think is possible or even desirable.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw that Erica.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Stu, I think the other thing is that you've mentioned here is when you talked about above ground mining requires 95% less energy. Somewhere, I think you said that.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, that's a profit driver, right? So now
it's a lower
recycled aluminum becomes a much cheaper source.
Exactly.
And the really cool thing about aluminum is that that is a material that can be reused and reused and reused.
Infinitely.
Plastics are a little bit different. We won't take a deep dive.
Right.
But I do see that Erica's asked a follow-up question here about the paradox doesn't vanish. And are we suggesting that this is all about how you think about it? And the answer is both yes and no. Yes, it's about how you think about it, but it's not only about how you think about it, it's about what you do with that. And what Feng had mentioned was the thing that I had suggested to our last cohort is that if you want to take a sustainability strategy into an existing company, you have to look at the company and say, what is the thing that is paining them the most? Okay, so if it's a profit issue from current operations, then you start in that lower left-hand quadrant and you say, how do we reduce materials? How do we reduce energy? How do we reduce water? How do we reduce our costs? And what's really wonderful about that is it's quite a virtuous cycle to say, well, if we reduce those things, we'll also reduce our expenses and we reduce our footprint. But on the other hand, they might say, well, now we have a really poor reputation and we're having a real difficulty having being able to do business on an ongoing basis because we are constantly under threat or under fire from external because people don't like our business practices. Did I mention that I worked in the chemical industry for 30 years? Yeah, I'm really familiar with that, right? That is an industry that has faced a constant threat on their license to operate. When people talk about outlawing plastics, that's an existential threat to the chemical industry, right? It doesn't have anything to do with their internal footprint, is everything to do with their inability to deal with their end of life product, right? So they're engaging stakeholders and giving billions of dollars now to the Alliance to End Plastic Waste, pull that out of the ocean, pull it out of the Great Lakes to make sure that we can recycle it. You know, so that's, you know, where's the biggest pain point there? It's in that lower right-hand quadrant. Other companies are saying we're not growing fast enough. We can't see our future market. Do they do clean technology or do they go to markets that they've never been in before? And it's by understanding where the pain is that sometimes you find the biggest opportunity then to rebalance your strategic and sustainable value portfolio.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think the same answer could also go to the question raised by Gaurav Go. So I believe that tonight we still have a lot of questions, you know, and thank you, you know, to everybody, 3 wonderful panelists. Actually, you know, if you still have any question or want to discuss, go to LinkedIn and get connected with Laura, Stuart, Feng, and me, and let's keep you know, our discussion. So before I'm saying goodbye, I would like to invite everybody open their video camera, and I'm going to invite my wonderful colleague, professional Zoom cloud photographer, Joey, to make a cloud photo for all of us. to to memorize, celebrate the event today. Hi, Joey, are you ready? Is everybody ready?
Give me 2 seconds.
Okay, 2 seconds. I'm still seeing that some friends haven't opened their camera. Come on, please. Joey, are you ready? I think Joey's network. Hello, Joey.
He's frozen.
Oh, I think. Joey, you were ready.
Joy maybe has some internet connection issue.
Okay.
Maybe Barbara, you could take the picture.
I would like to invite.
I'm ready. Okay.
Okay, great. Okay. Cheese.
Just show smile face.
Okay. Is it done, Joey?
1, 2, 3.
Cheese. Okay, thank you.
This is
Thank you,
really
everybody.
professional. Thank you.
Yeah. So I am going to send out a copy of LST study materials to
Okay.
everybody. Yeah. And so tonight, I would like
I
to thank
take it.
again for your participation. And good night. Good
Yeah, I'm
day.
done.
And bye-bye.
Everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye, Stuart.
Thank you, Stars.
Bye.
Thank you. Thank you, Lawrence. Thank you, Fun. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you, Nancy. Bye.